So what we're going to take away today is around financial forecasting and you know, just the conceptual ideas about that process is, first of all, you know, what will a forecast tell me? Like, what is it? And then what does it tell me? A lot of people will often wonder, is it the same thing as a budget? Exactly what are the steps we might go through to build it? Are there certain approaches we should take? And if so, what should we do there? What kind of information and data do we gather in order to actually create a forecast? And then lastly, you know, what do I do with it once I've done it? Is it just an exercise and then I put it away? How is it actually meaningful for me once I've gone through that exercise? So hopefully everyone is really familiar with their basic financial statements, balance sheet, which presents to your assets and liabilities and your equity. And that is always as of a certain date. So if you ever see, when you look at your balance sheet, it's always going to say, you know, Jody's consulting company balance sheet as of June 30, 2021, or, you know, whatever your end date is. Income statement is kind of the formal word. I had to learn that, you know, small business talks about profit and loss statements when I actually switched into this environment. So, but they're interchangeable. Income statement also is your profit and loss statement, and it reflects your revenues and expenses for a period of time. So your income statement or your profit and loss is always going to be for the period ended, let's say June 30. Or if you're talking about a future date, you know, it hasn't ended yet, it's always going to be for a period ending. And those are just some small nuances that are actually really important because, you know, as of a specific date has a much different meaning to you than what maybe happened over a period of time. And particularly because when we're talking about the balance sheet, you know, we're talking about, you know, what is our cash position? Where are we with our accounts receivable? So things that are impactful to the business on any particular given day versus what, you know, what we might be generating in revenue expense over, you know, a certain period. And then often an underutilized, but I think really important, I'm probably almost sometimes think it's more important than the income statement, is going to be the cash flow statement. And that's going to tell you the sources and uses of your cash over a period of time. So financial forecast, pro forma, what are all these definitions? So like we just talked about, your financial statements, those are going to be your actual results of your financial performance. And then you'll hear the term financial forecast, or you'll hear pro forma statements. Those are interchangeable words. And what that means is that you are doing a prediction of the results of your financial performance. So so maybe today I'm sitting here with my income statement slash profit and loss, and it tells me that, you know, I've generated $1 million in revenue through June 30, and I've generated $800,000 of expenses through June 30, and I've generated $200,000 through June 30 in terms of net income. So what do I want to know about my future? Is it, and I would say it's important for everybody to want to have a, you know, some sort of a pulse on what you think is going to happen in your future. And a lot of times this will absolutely tie into what your strategies are and what your financial plan, what your strategic plans are, from the standpoint of how what your goals operationally are going to actually affect, you know, the financial performance of the company, and, you know, whether or not the company is really positioned from a cash, you know, from an asset standpoint, primarily cash, or you know, other sources of cash to, you know, accomplish the goals and ultimately stay viable. All right, so sometimes folks might not understand clearly the difference between a budget and a financial forecast. And so, you know, the budget is that you actually plan to spend, you know, let's say you plan on your $800,000 of actuals, we planned to spend $900,000. And we actually broke that budget down into specifics. Like, you know, some of the money was earmarked for salaries, and some of it was earmarked for rent, and some was earmarked for leases if we're leasing equipment. So you have a specific idea about what your spending plan is. That can really be tied into, like, you know, things that you truly know about, you know, what your cost structure looks like. The revenue piece of a budget actually might mirror your forecast a little bit, depending upon what you do as far as projecting that revenue, planning for that revenue, and is that revenue going to include like existing business that you know about? And so that's really not much of a projection. It's a pretty simple, straightforward calculation. Or will it involve some forecasting where you have a plan to actually grow your company, and you want to grow top line revenue by, you know, X%. So that's how a budget and a forecast might work together. The other thing that could occur, and most usually does occur, is that your budget is, you know, you decide on your budget, and that's your spending plan, and you go along each month in following the budget, and you're actually looking at your actuals compared to your budget. And let's say that, you know, the company revenue-wise and income-wise is doing much better than budget was planned for, and expenses are steady, not exceeding what was planned for. So now you're in a position where your actual results are trending much better than you planned for according to your budget. So now it becomes really important for you to say, okay, I actually need to forecast what this is going to look like for the rest of the year, because at this point, you know, I'm blowing doors on my budget, and so my budget doesn't really seem very relevant anymore. So both of them are really important tools. I would say that in terms of what is kind of a dynamic tool for you in your business around financial management, it's going to be your forecast. So it's going to be whatever those predictions are about what you think is going to happen in your future. And forecasts generally, companies will do forecasting like twice a year, maybe at the end of, you know, their first 6 months. And then they'll go into another forecasting period where they'll forecast out maybe 1 or 2 years. Once you get beyond forecasting 3 years, you really are into the place where the data is not necessarily very reliable, and you're going to get, you know, much less accuracy around and meaningfulness, I guess, out of where you are at in doing that forecast. So that's one thing also you want to keep in mind, is that you need it to be meaningful, and so you do want to keep it, you know, on a pretty short rein when you start really forecasting things out into the future. So 5 financial forecasts and 5 easy steps, which I thought was kind of like some bad accounting humor. So I said not so easy steps here. But first of all, like what you're going to do is you're going to decide how you want to build it. There are, you know, different approaches. And then you want to gather your data and whatever information you might need. You need to decide on your goals. You want to create your assumptions, and then you want to create the forecast. And really, like where this will, you know, challenge you, in most cases, I would say 99% of the time, it's going to be on deciding the goals, and then it's going to be on creating the assumptions. You know, deciding how you're going to build it, that's, you know, a decision between some information sources. Collecting the data, presumably, you know, you've got whatever your bookkeeping system is, you've got, you know, good financial information going back for whatever period of time you think is relevant. And then, you know, creating the forecast, that's going to be just a mathematical experience in your Excel spreadsheet. But really, like being in tune with what, you know, your overall objective of the company is, and then setting the goals in terms of your financial forecasting, and then deciding what are those assumptions that will drive the goals that are going to drive this financial forecast. And this will, in a comprehensive approach to, your financial management of your company and your operational aspirations, these will also tie in very keenly, like with any sort of strategic planning that you might be doing. So there's a couple different sources of information that we use when we're going to do a forecast. And first always is going to be your historical data. So if you're established for a few years, that part is pretty simple. You just need to want to pull your profit and loss / income statement for a period of time. Generally, it's best to work from like a set of trended data. So you don't want to look at anything kind of in isolation. Like you don't want to look at maybe just this 6 months and say, I'm going to forecast out the future. You would want to pull like, the prior year also. And that in particular, because you do want to see like what is common in terms of my year to over year or month to month performance, and how do I think that trend is really going to happen in the future as well. Or the other piece could be maybe you have like really significant swings and changes in performance over time. And that also is something that's going to inform you about, okay, well, what's happening with my future? Do those changes and swings in information continue to this day? And I have relevant data proving to me that those will continue. Or, is my environment really changing? And although I had all of these interesting ups and downs in my history, what is it about my future and the knowledge that I have about the future that might change those kinds of swings in performance? The other piece that is going to be used is research-based data. Now, particularly like if you're a startup, you're probably going to be short on historical financial information, and so you may end up relying much more heavily on research-based data. And so that's going to be the market data, and when we think about around what is your demographic and what is how saturated is the market, what share of the market are you trying to get, what about the market is meaningful that needs to be something that you capture as a variable like in your plan for this forecast. Industry benchmarks are always a good tool to look for, and those might not necessarily be anything that you use in the actual forecast, but they will be for sure information that helps inform you to help you get to the place where you are figuring out your goals and your aspirations. And then they also can actually really be really good to use in terms of targets and what your plans are around, achieving something in the forecast. General economic forecast for the region, or, depending on your company, like, is it national, or if you're, in another country, what about those global or larger economies are going to impact, have some kind of meaning within your environment of your company. What do you know about competitors? That also is going to be very key information if you are able to get your hands on something like that. And then, specifically, and I think folks sometimes like don't even really consider that that operator experience and knowledge is a very meaningful piece of research-based data, because while you might not have much in the terms of the other data, if you are starting up this company and you are very well versed in what it is that you want to do, and you have background or in-depth knowledge about what it takes to be in that business, grow that business, operate that business. That also is going to really help you inform what happens in your forecast. Most forecasts are going to use a combination of both historical and research-based data, and what that boils down to is like taking what your known history and applying anything that you might find in your research-based data. So we know history is considered a really good predictor of the future, and then inside of then based on our research, like what about the research and understanding do we know about that then is going to like make the current history look different as we go into the future. And beyond like these kind of a formal like research-based data, you're also going to want to think about like just internally, like what are your plans coming up, and what do you know is going to occur? And so you want to be sure that you are capturing that information as well. Okay, so we've been through like just first 3 slides. Is there any questions at this point on that information? Okay, all right. So your first really big task in this process is deciding on your goals. So basically, like, what's the aspiration? Do we want to grow market share? Do we want to grow top line revenue? Do we want to really control expenses? Are we looking for, a certain net operating income or profit number? And then how are we going to define the goal? Are we going to select a specific target that we're trying to achieve? Are we going to base it on, a growth percentage? So, today I have Jody Consulting has, 2% of the Tucson market, and I want to have 5% of the Tucson market. So there I have actually selected a defined percentage increase that I'm going to use as kind of my driver. I'm saying I want my market share to increase to 5% from 2%. And that's going to then drive my, that's going to help me drive like both my revenue forecasting and my expense forecasting. You can do that with revenue. You can do it with your expenses. You can do it with your net operating income. There may be others that are not obvious, I guess, coming out of a set of financial statements, but you understand the nuances and relationships of how your operations business works and what's going on with your customers and your revenue streams. And so there could be others that you would say, this is part of my goal setting. So don't be limited by just these. These are just really like easy ones to think about. Sorry that this slide is actually pretty busy, but when we think about how we start building the assumptions, you want to operate from a place of logic. And when I say logical, like you want to have, if you set a goal and you say, I really am going to grow my revenue 100% next year. And, you have to decide like, how are you going to do that, right? So maybe you say, well, I'm going to just raise the price 100%. Well, is that, how logical and reasonable is that assumption? Because, first of all, like that's a pretty huge price increase. So is that going to turn off potential customers? Is that going to turn off existing customers? So you could have this grand idea that that's how you're going to increase your top line, but you potentially are going to negatively impact your customer and your sales growth potential. And so ultimately, while you've got, you're proud of the new price that you are boasting about in your company, like all your customers went away because no one was willing to pay that. That's really that's a huge exaggeration, but in terms of, an example of thinking through how I want to be really logical and really reasonable in my assumptions. Now, one thing to, I guess, maybe taper that a little bit is that no forecast is perfect, just the same as no budget is perfect. I mean, it's going to be your best information at the time in when you build this out. And so don't expect that you're going to be right on the money when you actually do a forecast or even a budget, because you know, this is really kind of just a little mirror into what you think your future might be. And the other thing that's important and really kind of like is reflected in the little analysis that we just talked through about, you know, what is the impact of making this one particular decision. Your assumptions are not necessarily going to be independent, and probably most times they're not independent at all. So as we said, we want to grow revenue 100%. We need to think about what is going to be the impact on our cost to grow that sales or revenue. Are we going to have more labor? Are we going to have more supplies? Are we going to have more marketing? So for every dollar of revenue that we think we're going to increase from whatever our process is to get new revenue, are we going to be incurring some incremental costs in order to produce, you know, that incremental revenue? So I guess ultimately, what I just want you to be sure you understand is, you know, is there a logical and reasonable connection? And so if you were to build your forecast and you then sit down and you talk to somebody about it who doesn't know your industry probably very well, but maybe just has some general business sense, that's always a really good test of whether your assumptions are actually pretty reasonable and logical, is if you can talk them through your thought process on how you've derived your assumptions and what all that underlying data is to help you decide, yes, that's a really reasonable approach. That's always a good test to see that you are somewhere in the universe of reality. Okay, so once you get through those two really hard parts, then we're to the place where we're going to create that forecast. You want to create it in the same format as your financial statements. You want to document your assumptions, your calculations, your data sources. Most forecasts are done in like an Excel spreadsheet, so all of that process is pretty easy. There are software packages out there also that will help you facilitate, doing a forecast. And, they all will basically kind of work the same. I mean, it's really about, a model of calculations and, showing how everything ties back into, your source data through that calculation. One thing that is really important, and I think a lot of people overlook this, is that when you are forecasting, you don't do it in a box, because comprehensive forecasting is not just the income statement. There are very significant impacts to your balance sheet and your cash flow statement too, as a result of what you think that forecast is going to look at. It's really important that you also forecast out the balance sheet and the cash flow statement, because what if you are fill out this great forecast and you feel really confident about it, and you don't test like what that impact is going to be on your financial position. You may be embarking on something in your forecast process, or something as a result of your forecast, and maybe it's not the best idea based upon where your current financial position is, and what if you were to achieve what's in that forecast, is that a negative or positive thing to your balance sheet as well as your cash flow. So I think people also, they'll shy away from forecasting a balance sheet and a cash flow statement because it does really seem very overwhelming. I think, a layperson who maybe is not educated in accounting necessarily might, really have some apprehension about it. And even like accountants, if someone is just purely an accountant, they're probably not going to be interested or good at forecasting. You really need someone who has more of an analytical approach. They have a really solid, strong understanding of accounting, but they are very, very much more focused on outcomes and solutions and analysis to help you understand and digest what you're doing in your financial statements, what you're going to do in this forecast, and how the mechanics of balance sheet and cash flow statements work in conjunction with your income statement. Okay, so now that we've got our forecast done, you know, Yahoo, we're done. Well, actually, not really, because it's only going to be a worthwhile exercise, and it's only going to be meaningful if you actually use it as a tool to drive your improvement and results. And so the best practice in actually making a forecast useful then is to do a periodic comparison of your actuals to the forecast. This will help you identify where there were weaknesses in the assumptions. It can identify opportunities for you to pivot, refocus, change your direction in your current strategies. And it also can validate or inform new approaches to your forecasting model. So it's a very worthwhile exercise, and you can actually learn quite a bit from going through the process, as well as then making sure that you make those comparisons back to your actuals. All right, that's everything I want you to understand today about